We are now going live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And we're going to give folks a couple of minutes to trickle in as we usually do because time is a colonial construct. And sometimes people are late. But we were talking about, before the show starts, we were talking about Beyonce's video, Black is King, that caused like a sensation across the internet around the world among African people. And about the particular image of Africa that presents, you know, like of wealth, like opulence, black capitalism, Monique keeps saying. Basically like a model of success for Africa and African people that very closely mirrors Western culture and European culture and what are valued in those cultures. And I remember like, you know, folks like No Name, a number of African sisters have like put out critiques of Black is King, and it's just been like a shit show. It's just been like a remarkable backlash. With No Name, I saw people like questioning her mental health for the crime of suggesting that art about Africa has to have some level of accountability to Africa, meaning art about Africa has a responsibility to speak to like the state of Africa and why it's like that because of capitalism and imperialism. And people were like, that's not Beyonce's responsibility, like how dare you, you're hating. And like the concept of it not being an African artist's responsibility to speak to the condition of Africa and African people is like wild to me. Like that's really wild to me because it used to be
always our role.
It's always our role. Like there's no Beyonce, there's no Jay-Z, there's no African billionaires, there's no African celebrities without Africa itself and without the struggle of the masses of African people. So Beyonce did not become Beyonce because she's just great. Beyonce became Beyonce because of the exploitation of Africa, because of the capitalist system, but also because of the struggles of the masses of African people to get her there. Like that woman would still be going in through the venue from the back entrance, like that was happening during Jim Crow, without the masses of African people struggling to get her to where she is, to get people like her to where she is. So of course she has to speak to our struggle. Like it's ridiculous that people believe that a person who was elevated on the backs of the masses of African people fighting to be free has no responsibility to us. I'm like, how the hell did that happen? Why do we think that? Why do we think that? That makes no sense. Anywho, we're just,
I don't know. I'm so glad that we started that discussion. But yeah, I don't get it either. I'm still processing it, I guess.
And she's like we said earlier, like she's very talented. She is undeniably talented, undeniably like Michael Jackson level, or perhaps beyond, famous at that point. But you can't just invoke Africa as like symbolism, Africa as like an aesthetic, and then ignore the fact that you as a wealthy American citizen are benefiting from the ongoing exploitation of Africa. You cannot be like, I love this kente, I love this line shit, I love African culture, and then be like, I have no responsibility whatsoever to talk about the fact that the United States is murdering people from the sky in Somalia and in the Sudan. I have no responsibility to talk about the fact that Google and Tesla and Apple and Microsoft are stealing resources from the Congo using enslaved African labor. Like, that makes no sense to me, especially, like I said, considering the fact that there is no wealthy African, there is no famous African, there is no African celebrity without the struggle of the masses of African people. Like, we got your ass there. So you have to talk about that shit. And people, like, fighting.
Exactly.
People fighting.
And not talking about it just puts on a facade that it's not happening. It's
exactly.
So critical and important that we're talking about what's happening on our people here and the continent, especially because, like, it's wanting to celebrate, like, its riches and the beauty of Africa, but let's also talk about the struggle that our people are facing. Exactly what you said, like, I can't even say it better. But just really elevating how this country continues to exploit, murder, and do genocide in Africa, and how that's important.
You gotta
like Africa wouldn't be in the place if it wasn't for this and other European countries. And we here in this country also benefit from the exploitations of what's happening in Africa as well.
Yep. Like we'll start the show in a second because now we have 13 people. Hi. But just to like wrap up this, like, yeah, if you have like, for example, a smartphone or a Fitbit or like a Prius or a laptop, MacBook, like the device The battery in that device, the rechargeable battery, is made with resources that are stolen from the Congo. It's made with coltan and cobalt and lithium. And those resources are mined, like I said, by enslaved African children. So like in a very real, like day-to-day way, we are using devices that are manufactured using resources that are stolen from Africa, that are stolen from, like, by companies that who will have a vested interest in keeping Africa exploited and poor. So like that's one example is the batteries, but there's many things like rubber, like cocoa, like cloth, like all kinds of things that this society uses on a day-to-day basis, that people like us use on a day-to-day basis, that come from the exploitation of Africa. Like this place cannot function without Africa.
Rubber, like all the rubber that's being used here, Q-tips, chocolate. Oh, don't even get me started about chocolate and the exploitation that happens.
Yes, there's plantations, like cocoa plantations in Ghana, where kids work as young as like fucking 10 years old, where they just like work day in and day out in like very close to slave labor conditions. And those children very often do not get to taste the finished product. Like when I went to Ghana, I met children who worked on those plantations who had never tasted a motherfucking chocolate bar because the finished product was too expensive for them to be able to afford it. So they are making these goods that are like shipped around the world from resources that are stolen from Africa, and they don't even get to enjoy that shit. They can't afford the shit that they're being exploited for. It's just like, yeah. So the idea that Beyonce can like invoke Africa at length, can like put on this whole aesthetic, and it's supposed to be like something that we celebrate. But when we say, yo, you have a responsibility to talk about what's happening to Africa, people are like, no, she doesn't. Like that's ludicrous. I'm sorry, that's fucking stupid.
I just also see something in the comment before we transition. I definitely want to read it. Someone says, as an African born on the continent, I do not feel empowered. I do not care for representation. I do not care for white people's opinions on the motherland. I'm only interested in African liberation. Beyonce does not care about Africans or Africa. She's just doing what she needs to do to add to her wealth. And again, it doesn't take away who she is as an artist. It doesn't take away anything of that, but just really elevating how Black capitalism harms us, and how we should all be concerned with what's happening to our people here and across the diaspora. So yes, she has full responsibility to talk about the struggle that our people are facing.
Thanks, Monica, for lifting up that comment. And yeah, don't just listen to the Africans that are like, we don't care about colonialism, we love Beyonce. Like, listen to the Africans that are saying, yo, we don't want representation, we want to be free. So cool. Anywho, if you just joined us, we were talking about Beyonce's video, Black is King, and sort of the response from folks that was defending the complete absence of analysis about colonialism and imperialism in Africa within that cultural work. And talking about why that is an extremely problematic mindset and why it also makes no sense, especially considering that African advancement has always been a collective process. There's only Beyonce because of the struggles of the masses of her people. So she owes us and she owes Africa, point blank, period. Anywho, so my name is Onya Samnu. This is my comrade Monica. We are members of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, because we are the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, also known as the AAPRP. And this is our show, Weekly Pan-African News Live. The AAPRP is a revolutionary Pan-African socialist party whose political objective is Pan-Africanism, which is one unified socialist Africa. Good morning, Bird. Good morning, Miriam. Good morning, Prudence. So good to see y'all. And so we do this show every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time because we want to give news, analysis, and political education from a revolutionary African perspective. We want to give y'all correct information about this raggedy pandemic so that you can keep yourself safe. And we want to talk about the work that we're doing to build the power of African people and to build Pan-Africanism. We created our own platform because we know that you're not going to hear anything that we're talking about on MSNBC, on BET, on CNN. We know that they're never going to have someone like me or Monica on those channels talking the way we talk. And so we made our own channel. We made our own platform. So this is that, Weekly Pan-African News Live. And we, like I said, we start off every show by acknowledging we're on occupied Tiwa territory. The Tiwa Nation is still the rightful owner of the land that Albuquerque was built on. They're still here. They're still fighting for their land back Just like we're fighting for the liberation of Africa's land, just like we're fighting for the return of our land, they're fighting for the return of their land here. And so we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge whose land this is. And also, if we have anything to do with it, they're going to get that land back. The United States does not have a right to exist. The United States is not going to last forever. Indigenous nations need to get their land back, just like we need to get Africa back. And so I'm going to start off with that. And then the other thing that we always start off with is that we always call in an ancestor. The reason why we do that is because, just like we were saying a few minutes ago, the struggle for African liberation is a collective struggle of the masses of African people. Monica and I aren't just like popping up out of nowhere with all this knowledge. We are coming from a continuum of struggle, a legacy of struggle that has lasted for centuries, that started when the first Europeans set foot on the shores of Africa for some fuck shit and continues to this day. And so we are always building off of that legacy. We are always calling upon that legacy. We are always learning from that legacy. And so we must acknowledge that legacy. And calling in the ancestor is the way we do that. So the ancestor we want to call in this week to ground us is someone whose name has been in the mouths of the ruling class. Someone whose very memory inspires fear in the hearts of the ruling class. To this day, 20 years after his passing, we want to call in revolutionary ancestor Kwame Ture, who, if you do not watch the news, his name was recently in the mouth of former President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton spoke at John Lewis's funeral, and he basically straight up said that he preferred the passive assimilationist resistance of Senator Lewis to the militant revolutionary Pan-African resistance of Kwame Ture. He said something like, you know, for a couple years though, now we went too far in the Kwame Ture direction. He used Kwame Ture's dead name, even though Kwame Ture has been Kwame Ture for like most of his life. But so he said that the African liberation movement went too far in a militant direction represented by Kwame Ture, and he was grateful that the assimilationist direction represented by John Lewis is what ultimately won out. And so, like I said, Kwame Ture died over 20 years ago. Kwame Ture is like resting in peace, but Bill Clinton and the U.S. ruling class and the Western ruling class still to this day live in fear of this man. They live in fear of what Kwame Ture meant. They live in fear in what Kwame Ture built. They live in fear of what Kwame Ture believed because those ideas still survive. And those ideas they know are their downfall. And so that's why Bill Clinton had to take that moment in that space to attempt to denigrate Kwame Ture, because Bill Clinton knows that Kwame Ture's work and what Kwame Ture represents is the end for Bill Clinton. So that's the ancestor we're calling in.
Yes, and it was intentional because of all the uprisings that we're seeing happening across this country. So it was intentional to elevate John Lewis and really try to discredit Kwame Ture. And the topic that we're talking about is really elevating about organizing and why organize and what does it look like, what doesn't work, what does work. And Kwame Ture is the essence of why organizing an organization is important.
He is the
essence of thank you for calling our ancestor in this space with us.
Yes, thanks, Monica. Yeah, so like Monica said, we do a political education topic every single week on the show. You're not going to find an APIP event that doesn't have political education because we know you cannot organize a sleeping people. Just like Malcolm X said, you must wake them up and then you get some action. Political education is how we wake folks up. And so the topic this week is what works and what doesn't in organizing from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective. And just like Monica pointed out, Kwame Ture embodies that revolutionary Pan-African perspective on organizing. Just to open the conversation, I want to say first and foremost that in order to fight for African liberation, in order really to fight for any kind of social justice issue, you have to be in an organization. So this whole conversation is going to proceed from the assumption that folks are having to be in organizations. Right now, there is a tendency for people to be like, I'm here by myself. I'm doing this work. I'm just like, this is my name. I have no organization. I'm just like a person, and this is how I'm going to do the work. And people think that's like a functional way to do this. And the reality situation is that there has never been a successful struggle for liberation against capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism that was not organized, that was not a collective work, There's never in the history of the world been a person who single-handedly defeated capitalism, been a person who single-handedly defeated colonialism, imperialism. It's just not going to happen by yourself. So
it's not. And name a person that has been a leader in the movement. They're connected to an organization, and that's what Kwame Ture also highlights.
Yep. If you think about Malcolm X, he was in the Nation of Islam. Then he started organizations everywhere he went, like the Organization of African American Unity. If you think about Ella Baker, who we're going to talk about in a second, she was in SNCC. If you think about Marcus Garvey, he had the UNIA. If you think about any prominent African revolutionary that actually did work for our people, they were in an organization. So if you think that you by yourself are going to do anything for us that's going to accomplish our long-term goals, it's going to accomplish our liberation, you are confused. So again, we're going to have this conversation starting from a baseline assumption that folks must be in organizations to build Pan-Africanism and fight for African liberation. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts, Monica. What are some strong principles that we bring to organizing work as the APRP?
Yeah, so something that's really important in organizing is having a strategy that's connected to a collective vision, so it's not an individual vision, and it's also connected to ideology and political education, and that's really critical and that's really strong. And so something that I think about is Ella Baker, for example, had strategy, and so for example, Ella Baker organized with NAACP, with SNCC. And they had massive strategies. So they set up over sit-ins in over 100 cities. On top of that, that was their strategy, right? They had a collective vision of why they were doing the sit-ins, how to engage people, how for it to be youth-led, student-led. So this was mostly young people doing this work. And on top of that, ideology. So they also did political education, was so embedded in what they did. And so they set up freedom schools where they were able to learn about strategy, learn about collective vision. They believed about training leaders. It's not the movement, it's the movement. And they could see it needed a long-term strategy and not an event, not something that was, it had to have long-term longevity, right? So what was the action that was going to happen? Because this struggle is real, white supremacy is so embedded. And so what they worked is from a function of what's our collective vision as a whole, as a community? What are we fighting for? And they were fighting for African liberation, and they were fighting against injustices. So they were able to identify, again, a strategy, a collective vision, and ideology that was focused as an organization. And Ella Baker did that wherever she went, whether that was in the NAACP or whether that was in SNCC. That a lot of organizers came out of SNCC and mentored so many and developed organizations that focused on our people.
Whereas SNCC was really the root of so much militant, revolutionary Pan-African organizing that erupted in the United States in the 60s and 70s. And obviously SNCC itself came from a legacy of strong African organization with a strong ideological foundation. This principle of needing the necessity of a shared strategy, a shared vision, a shared ideology is foundational to why the APRP focuses so hardcore on political education. Because like I said, we understand that if we are trying to organize our people, there is absolutely no way that's going to be successful unless our people understand the plan. And the way that you have a shared idea of what the plan is, the way that you have a collectively developed strategy is if everybody's on the same page in terms of ideology. And the way that you get everybody on the same page is that political education.
And that political education builds consciousness. You will end up thinking that the conditions that exist are because of you. And then when you read and you realize the conditions that exist are rooted in white supremacy, that allows you to learn more and learn more. So ideology is only equipping us with knowledge on informing our practice as organizers and informing us to share information and educate others about what's really going on in our communities. So political education is a key principle. How are we going to dismantle a system if we don't know how the system it harms us? Exactly. It's just not going to work that way.
Precisely, exactly. And a really clear example of why it's so important to have like the shared ideology, to have the shared vision, to have a collectively built strategy is like the example of the revolution against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau that was fought by the PIGC. For folks that don't know, the PIGC was formed by Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral was an extremely famous Pan-African revolutionary who, formed this organization because he saw Portuguese colonialism was some fuck shit. He saw that capitalism as imposed in Guinea-Bissau was some fuck shit. And he was like, we can organize the masses of our people here to destroy this, to dismantle this. And so they did. The PIGC was able to organize every single sector of society within Guinea-Bissau, was able to enlist Africans across genders, across ages, into this struggle to liberate themselves. And people always talk about Amilcar Cabral like he did that shit on his own. But the reality of the situation is that if the PIGC had not done that work to engage in political education, to engage in organization, to build this collective vision of liberation in Guinea-Bissau, that revolution would have failed because Amilcar Cabral could not do it by himself. And the way that you can tell that that is why it happened, that organization and focus on building a collective vision and a collective ideology was the key, is that Amilcar Cabral was assassinated before the revolution against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau was successful. He was killed before he ever saw his people win. But they went on to win without him because he wasn't just like one man being like, follow me. It was a movement. It was every single sector of that society being organized for that objective of liberation, which meant that when he died, there were thousands and thousands of leaders to replace him, so it didn't matter. Like, obviously his loss was a great tragedy, but it's also a testament to how important collective vision and collective strategy and collective ideology developed through political education and organization is, as a clear example. Like, it cannot be a situation where we lose one leader and the whole movement's done. It has to be a situation where we are, through this process of political education, through this process of building a collective strategy, we are developing many, many, many leaders. That's why the APRP is a cadre organization. We are trying to make thousands of revolutionary leaders in the movement. So if I get hit by a bus, if something happens to Monica, there's still thousands of people to replace us, and the struggle continues. So first principle, first do, is having that strategy, collective vision, and ideology. That's the key thing, a key principle to organizing that works. What's another key principle, Monica?
We talk about like relationships is so important. So like how to have relationships connected to like integrity as well as accountability. And how can you be accountable to yourself? You got to be accountable to the movement, to the community. So having building deep relationships and cultivating those relationships, having integrity and those values and how you approach the work, accountability to the community and to the movement. You can't be accountable to yourself. Yep. Who can I be accountable to if I'm just an individual doing this work? But when I'm accountable in an organization or I'm accountable in a community, and we have so many leaders that stress that, right, in our communities.
Yeah, 100%. Like, that's another reason why you can't just be out here by yourself. It's another reason why we need folks in organizations, because none of us is perfect. We are all fallible human beings that have been like indoctrinated into capitalism, have been indoctrinated into colonialism and imperialism, which means we've internalized like a lot of harmful practices and beliefs, even about ourselves. And so the purpose of being in an organization, in addition to, working on a collective basis, is to have a community that's going to be like, you are on some bullshit right now. Like, what you're doing isn't right.
Definitely. And as an organization, too, when you're building those relationships, you're able to build relationships with other organizations that are values aligned, other organizations that are working towards similar causes or similar different things. And so, like, having an organization, you're able to see very clearly, like, what's your overall goal, what's the purpose that you're working toward, and your accountability to it. Like, I learned so much being in the AAPRP, like, on a daily, about so many things, and I'm accountable. I'm accountable to our people. I'm accountable to the movement, and like Kwame Ture is an example of that. So Ella Baker is an example of that. So many people. I think about Amy Garvey. Like, I didn't even know about Amy Garvey. I learned about Amy Garvey through Onya Sawu. And I was like, wait, I don't know about anything that she did. And I had to like research and learn about her. I'm like, wow, she was definitely accountable to the people before Marcus Garvey, her husband, was locked up, and while he was locked up and beyond. Like, she was always accountable to the movement and to her people to really center African liberation.
Word. And when you're accountable to an organization, when you're an active member, an active revolutionary organization, it like changes how you move in the world. Like, I am an APRP cadre, which means I represent the APRP 24/7, 365. Like, it's very difficult to engage me in conversation and not hear about the APRP. And maybe that's like annoying for people, but it's just how it is. Because this is the most important thing I do in the world, and this is the work that guides my life. And so I'm constantly representing this organization, whether it's as like a member of the editorial team of Hood Communist, which is like a revolutionary African nationalist blog. Like, I'm not there as myself. I'm there representing the APRP. Any coalition space, any direct action, if you ask me to speak on a panel, like, you're not getting Onyesanu, you're getting the representation of the AAPRP. And so that changes how I move. I know I cannot say any kind of fuck shit because I know that I'm going to be representing the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I'm going to be representing the movement to build Pan-Africanism. And so it changes how I engage things. It changes how I move in the world. And it also means that when I make a misstep, when I say something that does not represent that shit well, there's a whole community of people that's going to be like, look, you have to do better, and this is how you can do it. So
definitely.
Deep relationship.
I just want to add to that accountability theme. It's about calling us in, right? So yeah, if we do misstep, if something happens, like we can be called in, and we can like take ownership, right? Take ownership in being called in, and like, how do you adjust that? How do you learn from that? How do you grow from that? And that's the beauty of being part of an organization, right? We can call each other in with love, yep, and like work to grow.
Absolutely. Hell yeah. Another really core principle about how we approach this work as revolutionary African women, as Pan-Africanists, is the idea of bottom up. Like, sometimes people call it grassroots. Sometimes people call it centering the most impacted. But basically the idea that the people who are being victimized by the systems we're trying to destroy are the people who are best equipped to take leadership in the struggle to destroy those systems. Like, the idea that, for example, no shade, but there's like a whole bunch of people who are like, what the Deliberation Movement needs to do right now is vote for Joe Biden. And I'm trying to be polite. So like, to me, that's ludicrous, because even if Joe Biden like wasn't a racist, wasn't a rapist, wasn't an imperialist, wasn't a capitalist, like, even if he was like the perfect person, the idea that like this person who is seeking like absolute power and like absolute wealth could somehow speak for people who are like living on the streets, people who are being victimized by imperialism, people who are being exploited under capitalism, that the idea that someone who's like so removed from the impact of his decisions could somehow like be the solution to those contradictions makes no sense to me. The idea that change could come from the top down, from people who have no idea what we're going through, rather than like from us, like from the bottom up, like, to me, on its face, does not make sense. And so like, when people are like, what we need to do right now is vote for Joe Biden, I'm like, no, what we need to do right now is organize tenants and organize workers and engage in mutual aid and deliver care packages to elders and engage in popular education to educate our community. We don't need to worry about what this rich white man is doing. We need to worry about the day-to-day reality of the masses of African and colonized people.
Yeah, we have to center the most impacted. Like, why are we talking about voting still? Like, I don't even get that. Because where in history has voting changed the conditions of our people as a collective?
Right.
Name it.
Right.
It doesn't exist. It's never changed the condition. Things have shifted, things have morphed it, and we're still disproportionary in home ownership, name it. And experiencing homelessness is on the rise. Overpopulated in prisons. So how has reform work and voting changed the conditions of our people? Like, it doesn't. So why are we working on that? When we know what works, we know as a community getting us and having each other's back and supporting our community's needs, that's what works.
Yep.
And so let's invest our time into that rather than investing our time into voting that actually isn't changing or moving the needle at all for our people. We're disproportionately in every category being oppressed, literally.
Yep, 100%. And like the way you can tell that voting is not what's gonna get us out of the situation is that like right as the pandemic was hitting, we were in the middle of the Democratic primary, right? It was like Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden, and like all the other people dropped out because they're trying to screw over Bernie Sanders. That's what happened. I don't care what you say. But so the pandemic hit, right? And then all of a sudden, we had all been like breathlessly following the primary, right? And then as soon as the pandemic hit and people started losing their jobs and people started getting sick and people started dying, you didn't see anybody talking about the Democratic primary. Because all of a sudden, like the immediate conditions of our lives were being drastically impacted by like this massive change, like by the pandemic, right? And it became extremely obvious that everything that was happening in the Democratic primary had like nothing whatsoever to do with what was happening in our day-to-day lives. And that's why people stopped talking about it. Because that shit had no impact whatsoever. It had no impact whatsoever. Even the election, which is supposed to be in like a couple of months, like seems like so unimportant given the day-to-day reality of like 2,000 people dying in the United States every day, of millions of people losing their jobs, of millions of people facing imminent evictions. Like all of that shit is happening and the election has no impact whatsoever on it. It has no impact whatsoever. The most drastic impact that's being made upon those conditions is like the organizing of regular people. The organizing of workers demanding protection, demanding PPE. The organizing of mutual aid programs like the Albuquerque Mutual Aid Project or the APRP's Community Defense Program. That's what's actually feeding people. The organizing of tenants to say, yo, we cannot pay our rent, so you cannot evict us. Like, that is the only thing that's, like, affecting people's lives at this moment. Like, what Joe Biden said, like I feel like the only time you ever hear about Joe Biden is if he's saying something racist or someone else has accused him of sexual assault. Like, that's the only time you hear about him. Because otherwise, he's not...
When I hear about him, it's all, like, over the internet. I'm like, what did he say now?
Something racist. Something racist. Something racist. What did he say? Like a week ago, he was like, we need to arrest anarchists. Before that, he was like, instead of shooting, like he said, the police, instead of killing people, should shoot them in the leg. I was like, oh my God. It's so irrelevant.
It just doesn't end.
Word. 100%. So we got some really good comments. Our Comrade Prudence says, we had a whole black president who didn't give a damn about us. How the hell are people thinking a racist like Biden can do anything good for us? It's a good question. It's a good question. Who motherfucking knows? Our Comrade Bird, shout out to Bird. Bird is made of mass. Said, yes, power from below, 100%. Like, that's a core principle of how the APRP approaches this work. We are not a vanguard party. We are a mass party because we are attempting to organize every single sector of our people. We are attempting to organize, like, mamas, babies, grandmas, poor and working class African people around the objective of our liberation and around the objective of the liberation of Africa. There's no one that can do it for us. There's no one we can vote for that will accomplish that for us. Only we can do that. Only regular, massive African people can do that. So yes,
I want to just bring up two more comments. Bird said, build moments, not elections. Hell yes. And we cannot vote. Prudence said, we cannot vote oppression away. Exactly. Like, it's just not going to just go away because we voted away. That doesn't even make sense. When a system was actually built to oppress us, how will we use the system to vote it away?
100%. Like, they need, like, you said it right there. Like, this system cannot function without exploiting Africa and African people. So there's no way whatsoever that the system is going to liberate Africa. If the system needs coltan from the Congo, diamonds from Azania, cocoa from Ghana, like if it needs if it needs rubber from Liberia, if it needs those resources to function on a day-to-day basis, it is not going to give Africa or African people the power to control those resources. It's going to keep us exploited. It's going to keep us oppressed. Every single president that sits in the White House is going to make sure that Africa stays exploited and oppressed. They're not going to stop our oppression if they need it to function on a day-to-day basis, if they need it to keep the system running, which means that it's on us. There's no one we can vote for. There's no one coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. So bottom up, center the most impacted. So let's talk about some things. So we talked about some key principles, some do's, if you will, about organizing. We talked about having a strategy, a collective vision, and an ideology. We talked about having deep relationships based on integrity and trust and accountability to the movement. We talked about building from the bottom up and centering the most impacted. And so now let's talk about some don'ts. let's talk about some things that definitely do not work when it comes to organizing. So what's the don't, Monica?
Yeah, and we kind of brought it up earlier, is like individualism, right? Like no individual is able to represent like the people and able to work toward change. Like it's just not going to happen. Like definitely being part of an organization is important. And what we see a lot happening now about individuals being lifted up is all these celebrities, like celebrities who are on the ground doing the work, the day-to-day hard work, the movement work that's critical for our people. Like we see them continuously in spaces speaking for our people when they're not even connected or aligned to the work.
Right. They're like in no way, shape, or form accountable to us, but they are selected to speak for us because they are wealthy and they have access to those platforms. So like the folks we're talking about, and this is like, you know, they don't know what they don't know. I've never met them. They might have good intentions, but we'd have to call out what's happening. So folks like T.I., folks like Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry was recently interviewed, and he said that I don't agree. Like the demand on the streets right now is to fund the police. Tyler Perry said, actually, I disagree. And the reason why Tyler Perry said that is because his studio's in a neighborhood where he thinks that they need more police. And what that really means is that Tyler Perry is a rich motherfucker, and rich motherfuckers are aware that they are surrounded by many desperately poor people, and so rich motherfuckers are very, very interested in like protecting what they got from the rest of us. And that's the function that police serve. And so when Tyler Perry says, I don't agree with defunding the police, I think we need more police, what he's actually saying is, I am very rich, and I would like to stay that way, and I do not wish to share. So that's what he's saying. But because he's African, and because he's like, you know, visible, he gets to speak for us.
And let's say you don't know what you don't know, right? But in the same breath, there's so much information, like you can just research it, or it's just on social media. So I think about when they say Tyler Perry says we need more police. I think about in New Mexico, the police budget was $176 million last year.
Wow.
It's $200 million now.
Wow.
And do you know what we can do with that money for the people, for the community, the social services that's needed? No, more police just continue more state violence. More police continue plantation work. Like, no, we don't need any more police. It's not doing anything to create a betterment for the community. So you don't know what you don't know, but in the same breath, like, what do you see, like, how police benefits our communities? Like, it, in no way, shape, or form has it ever supported safety in our communities.
So because he's not in community, like Tyler Perry is not in community with us, Tyler Perry is not accountable to us, Tyler Perry is in no organization whatsoever, and so Tyler Perry can just say any kind of random shit, even if it's like directly contradicting what the people are saying in the streets, and he gets the platform to say that. There is no accountability because there is no organization. He's not part of the movement.
I think about Killer Mike too, and what's happening in Georgia, right? And so, for example, like, because he's not rooted in community, not knowing what's going on, he's making all these comments about, like, why are you burning this stuff up and doing these things to the communities? But yet not understanding all the disparities and the injustice in all the organizations on the ground doing the work. Like, for example, I was reading about the Atlantic Housing League. In Georgia, there's 33% African folks right there. And only less than 25% have home ownership. So they've been fighting and organizing for home ownership. They've been organizing sit-ins, they've been organizing teach-ins, they've been organizing protests. And what his comment is dangerous, right? His comment is dangerous because what people are doing is what we're all seeing in all these uprisings in Georgia and everywhere is the outcry and outpour of years and years and years of state destruction and state violence that's happening in the community. Like, even Martin Luther King could see, like, what a riot meant, right? And what that meant and what that stood for. And so what he did was he put a huge ass magnifying glass to people who are organizing in the streets, rather than putting a magnifying glass to the social conditions that cause harm to our communities. That is dangerous. And that hurts us more than it helps us, because they're like, they can find their African who support their cause, who support their beliefs. And what it does is and what they look at Killer Mike and the TIs and the others as leaders in the movement, and they're not involved in the movement. They're only speaking from themselves, and there's no accountability to what they're saying.
Yeah, and you mentioned like Martin Luther King, right? That quote where he talks about how a riot is the language of the unheard. Like Martin Luther King had a particular approach to organizing, right? That was based on the principle. He treated nonviolence as a principle. But he had many contemporaries, including Kwame Ture, including many of the members of SNCC that we talked about, who did not share that principle. But when it came down to it, when the people were in the streets, when the people were rising up, you never saw Martin Luther King condemn them. You never saw him get on TV and be like, don't burn them. Because he understood precisely what Monica just explained. And also because Martin Luther King was in a motherfucking organization. Martin Luther King was accountable to the movement. These people who are condemning regular working class Africans who are burning down buildings in communities that do not belong to them. That's why that shit's on fire, because it does not belong to them. These celebrities are not accountable to the movement. These celebrities are part of no organization whatsoever. So these celebrities are just basically speaking for the ruling class. They're like a fucking African face on ruling class rhetoric.
Anya Sabu, one more thing. Like, you say it better than I've ever heard anyone say it, is no matter like how many buildings are being burnt, could you like elevate that about how it will never ever connect to the destruction this country has done? Like, you just articulate it like so deeply, it like speaks to my soul. So you just talk about like, if you like, no matter how, all the riots, all the burning buildings would not equate to the amount of genocide, imprisonment, abuse, rape, butcher of our people, of indigenous people, of African people. So no matter how many buildings are burnt, like, that doesn't even equate to the harm that they continuously do in our communities. And why is that the focus? Why is not the focus about the uprisings? Because we want to be liberated. We do not want to be oppressed. Why is this focus continuously to be, like, from a European perspective?
Yep.
Basically.
A capitalist perspective, a ruling class perspective. It's like wealthy people attempting to speak and tell like masses of poor and exploited people how they should speak. And it's just not, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And then I also want to say like the phenomenon we're talking about where it's like, you know, an individual by themselves who is not accountable to the movement, who is part of no organization, sort of being elevated by the struggle of African people. Like, it's not just celebrities that do that. There's like people in the movement that do that. Probably the most famous example is DeRay McKesson. If you don't know DeRay McKesson, he's a queer African man who rose to prominence because he live tweeted the Ferguson uprising. He was not from Ferguson. He would just happen to be there in Ferguson, or I think he like flew out there and he was like tweeting the updates to the world, mostly to a European audience. And on the basis of that particular work, he was elevated into like a leader within the struggle. Like for a 6-year period there, people were like, this is DeRay McKesson, the leader of Black Lives Matter. Meanwhile, the man was like in no organization, or he'd started an organization, it was like only him and his homies, and they didn't do anything. So like there was this person who was elevated as like a face, as like a leader, as like someone to like look to when we want like an analysis of Black Lives Matter, who it was in no shape or form accountable to the masses of people that were actually creating this movement. And then when he started doing things that were counter to the demands, like, you know, calling for police body cameras, when people been figured out that police body cameras, if the police control the footage and can control when they can turn them on and turn them off, it's just like another way for people to catch charges. Like, people were like shooting down all the things that they came up with already, but because DeRay McKesson was not accountable to the movement, because DeRay McKesson was an individual that was elevated on the back of a social media presence, he took up like a hell of a lot of space. And it became a point where... And profited.
Off the movement.
Yep.
And there are people doing that now.
A lot of people. So, like, we just want to reiterate that, like, you as an individual person, you off by yourself, just as your name, with no organization behind you, is not helping us. It's not helping us. We need people in organizations doing this work. We need people who are accountable to those organizations and accountable to the movement and accountable to the masses of African people. You as yourself doing shit, even if it's positive shit, it's not what we need. It's not what we need.
And because, like, who's going to take on the work?
Exactly.
Like, the work that you're doing, who's carrying that work forward? The work that we're doing is not new. The work that we're doing is what our ancestors have been doing, our mentors have been doing, right? And we've been learning from it and continuing the work. So if an individual is just doing the work, something happens to them, what happens? It's gone.
Yep. And also one thing I want to shout out is that, so like this model of activism that we're talking about, where it's like the individual over everything, like it's extremely common, unfortunately, among African people in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry. Like, it used to be the case that we had like Eartha Kitt, we had like motherfucking Harry Belafonte, we had like all Aretha Franklin, who like bailed people out of jail. Like, we had folks in the movement who were connected to the movement, who were connected to the Black Panthers, who were connected to revolution. Excuse me, let me drink water. I was talking too much. But who were connected to revolutionary African organizations and were therefore accountable to us. That right now is extremely rare. It's extremely rare. But it's not like gone all the way. There's people like No Name, for example. No Name is a young African woman, a hip hop artist who we have witnessed become radicalized in public, who is using her platform to elevate anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonial analysis in a way that's accessible to a wide audience. And she's not just doing that on her own. Like, I think the reason that like trajectory started for her is that she made like a tweet that like kind of like was in praising capitalism or positive emotions toward capitalism, and folks like called her in. Revolutionary African organizations called her in, and she listened. She listened. Like, she was wrong, and she listened, and she changed her behavior. And then after she listened and changed her behavior, she wasn't just out by herself saying the right thing. She decided to start an organization, No Name Books, a book club that has like book lists of like revolutionary reading in libraries across the country, a book list that has like groups of people studying together in groups across the country. She started an organization that is accountable to the movement, that is raising the consciousness of African people. Do you see the difference between a T.I., a Killer Mike, a DeRay McKesson, a Tyler Perry, and a No Name? Do you see why what No Name is doing is what we need? And do you see why DeRay McKesson and people like him are going to drag us the fuck down? Like, I just want to shout that out because it's super important. Like, we talk about what like doesn't work, but we have to talk about what does. We have to talk about what people need to replicate, to talk about what people need to learn from. And that's why we want to shout out No Name, because she did that. Like, she was wrong in public and she owned it. That never happens. That never happened. And I guarantee you the reason she did that is because she's accountable to her people, because she loves her people, because she understands she's nothing without her people. So like, yeah, shout out to No Name, and also like T.I., Killer Mike, Tyler Perry. They are not our leaders. They're just like rich Africans in the front. That's it. That's it.
Yep. Another thing that doesn't work is compromising with the enemy.
Yes.
And I saw in the comments that Prudence put, we say abolish, they say reform. So for example, right now there's been, like, people have been working for abolishment for a long time. And people are, what you start seeing, I've been seeing lately, is this word reform all over again. I'm like, wait, yeah. Why are we compromising? Why are we compromising with the enemy and we're saying, let's do reform work, when we know more training will not help, when we know police cameras will not help, when we know none of that will help? Like, police were created to capture our ancestors, period. Yep. It never changed. We are not going to focus up, we're not going to compromise and say reform. Abolish is the only way that's going to happen, and we have to create something that replaces it, right? That is centered in our people, that is sitting in healing, that is sitting in restorative justice and accountability. But like, we're not going to compromise. We're not working on reform. We're working toward abolition in all systems, right? Whether that's police, whether that's prisons, even schools are embedded in Eurocentric curriculum. So we're about abolishing all systems embedded. And so we know we will not compromise. And so that's really something that's important as well. Don't compromise your values. You don't have to work with the enemy.
Word. And I feel like, yeah, this idea that it was really interesting to see when the pandemic hit, people started dying. Millions of people lost their jobs. Millions of people facing eviction. Like, when that happened and it revealed like how unequipped this system is on a basic level to help people survive, to me, that was an indication that we have to ask for everything. Like, at this point, if we lean on this system, if we like depend on the system to make like incremental changes to like kind of tinker around the edges, millions of people are going to die. Like, we're literally living through the part where millions of people are going to die because the system is not equipped to save lives. The system only exists to protect wealth, and the system exists to like protect that wealth from us. So like, I saw that and I was like, man, we got to demand everything. We have to fight for everything because everything is at stake. But some people saw that and they were like, no, we gotta settle for Biden. We gotta settle. It's like a real campaign. It's a real campaign. So it's like this Instagram. There's this Instagram. You can look it up. It's at Settle for Biden, all one word, and literally the whole.
No, they did it.
It's real. It's real. Like, the whole focus of the campaign is that he's not great, but we're just gonna go with him anyway. And I'm just like, I don't understand, man. Like I said, I learned from the example of Guinea-Bissau. I learned from the example of the militant struggle against apartheid. I learned from the example of the Cuban Revolution. Like, I learned from the example of like regular Vietnam, like regular masses of working class people changing their conditions because they got to a point where they're like, we're gonna be free, period. And then they did it. So like, I know, coming from my background, coming from like, you know, being in the APRP, that we don't actually have to settle for anything. Like, we don't have to like we don't have to just be like, I'm just gonna go with the other rapist, like the blue rapist. Like, we actually don't have to do that. We actually don't have to do that. Like, less than 100 miles off the coast of the United States is Cuba, a country that had a revolution, and a country that now has universal health care, that now has universal subsidized housing, a country that now has 0 new cases of coronavirus and 0 homeless people. So you're telling me less than 100 miles offshore is a whole fucking country of people that didn't settle, that instead fought for things that they were told were impossible and won them. And you're telling me, in the heart of like the richest empire on the face of the planet, in the heart of an empire that is watching its people die by the thousands every single day and not do anything, in the heart of an empire that is currently standing down in an eviction crisis where 30 million people are going to be houseless, you're telling me that I have to settle for the dude who definitely raped several people, who is definitely super racist, and who's definitely going to bomb the fuck out of like a lot of countries. I just settle for him instead of like demanding the impossible and fighting for it, even though I know that shit will work. Like, what the hell? What the hell? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't
make any sense to me. And the only reason you could believe that that was the correct strategy in this moment is if you didn't believe in the potential of regular people to change their conditions. And the only way you could believe that is if you ignored every single successful revolution in the history of the planet. Like, why?
And that's why political education is so important.
Yes.
That is why it's so important, because we can see how people continuously save themselves and how we can do that.
Yes.
And it's like, no, I'm not organizing the vote. Yes, we are organizing for African liberation. Yes, we want you to be involved in doing this with us. Yes, yes, yes.
People like don't know how to take it. Like, every so often people will come on our Facebook or our Instagram comments because we post like just like things Biden said or things he's done that are like true. Like, they're just like correct, like he's done those things, and people will be like, no, shh, like, you're gonna make him lose, like, we have to vote for him. And I'm like, first of all, like, if your strategy for liberation depends on me not saying things that this man has done, like true things this man has done, like, I question the strategy. But second of all, like, you might accept that voting for Biden is all that we can accomplish for our liberation struggle right now, but I do not accept that. And like I said, history's on my side. So, like, you can come on our page and be like, no, we must vote blue no matter who. But we don't actually have to accept that, because that is not the strategy we're pursuing in this struggle. We're revolutionary Pan-Africanists. We're revolutionary socialists. We're going for revolution. We're not going for the lesser evil.
Exactly. When you said that, I thought it was a new hashtag they're going to use.
It's a whole Instagram like that, and I think it's like officially sanctioned by the campaign. Like, they got graphic design, they got fucking branded hashtag. I'm just like, I know that someone got paid like thousands of dollars for that, and I'm just like, you should be ashamed of yourself. It's just like, it's like the worst thing I've ever seen. Oh my god, like, it's so bad. Good lord. So yeah, don't compromise, especially at this point in history. Like, so we have the pandemic, right? We have the eviction crisis was already there, and now it's been taken up to 100. We have, the unemployment crisis that came from the lockdown, right? But even before that shit was happening, we had catastrophic climate change, baby. We were already looking at the end of the world if capitalism continues. So, like, the idea that we have to keep compromising with the system that has clearly indicated has no intent of changing the fundamental problems that put us in this place in the first place is literally just like, it's like extending, it's setting us up for a slow death. It's setting us up for a slow death. If you compromise with this system that is destroying the planet, that is leaving people to die, that is exploiting people around the world, if you compromise with this system and its agents, you are setting yourself and your people up for a very prolonged and painful death. But if you go for the revolution side, who knows what can happen?
Exactly. Like, you literally can map out somebody's lifespan by their zip code.
Wow. In
this capitalist society. Like, damn, that is sad as hell. Like, no, I do not want to live in this system. I don't want any of us to live in this system. Like, we need systems. Like you were saying, we see they exist. We see countries actually providing for their people. That's what I want to see here. That's what we all want to see here, right? And it's not going to happen in capitalist society that currently exists now.
There's no one you can vote for that's going to make what we're talking about happen. Only we, the masses of regular working class and poor, African, indigenous, and colonized people, only we can do it. You just got to believe in yourselves. I watch too many Disney movies to put my hope in motherfucking Joe Biden. I know that I and the masses of people have the capacity to do this because I believe in us. I believe in us. So yeah, that was the last do not. So individualism is a do not, does not work, do not do it. It's a don't, whatever you want to say. And also compromising with the enemy and compromising with this system that is literally going to let us die is something that does not work in revolutionary organizing. So let's see what the folks are saying. Bird is laughing at us because we were making fun of Joe Biden. Comrade is pointing out that they are using Angela Davis to promote this. Angela Davis is a sad situation, but I just want to make it clear that that when she was like, vote for Biden, that was not the first time she did that. She says the same thing about Hillary Clinton in 2016. She actually
wait, she's pushing vote for Biden?
Because of Trump. Because like Trump is an existential threat, and so we must vote for Biden to defeat Trump is her position. But like I said, so she did it in 2016 when it was Clinton versus Trump. She said vote for Clinton because Trump is an existential threat. But she also did it in 2012 when it was fucking Obama versus Romney. She said Romney is an existential threat and we must vote for Obama to avoid Romney. So the reason why I'm like, pointing out that she's done this before is to say that she's coming from a particular perspective that doesn't necessarily have a basis in reality. And that's the nicest way I can say that. Like, much respect to Angela Davis for the work that she has done around prison abolition. But if you are telling me that Mitt Romney in 2012 was an existential threat, you're full of shit. You're full of shit. Explain to me the difference between Romney and motherfucking Obama. I lived in Massachusetts when Romney was fucking governor. I had motherfucking mass health. That shit is better than Obamacare. I don't give a fuck who you are. So, like, the idea that this man was, like, so evil or whatever, or, like, somehow so much worse than Obama, that this woman once again was, like, vote for the Democrats as a revolutionary strategy, it's not the case. Like, it's not the case. Like, I don't know. I do have some ideas about why she's doing that. Yeah. Like, I have some ideas.
To deconstruct because, it's like you were saying, vote blue. So, like, there's this misconception, especially in the African community, I feel, that if we vote for blue, that our conditions will change.
Right.
And so, like, definitely not to take away from the work Angela Davis has done as an abolitionist, but I'm like, let's apply that same teaching and strategy that she talks about in abolition around prison, around the whole system.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that change is going to happen, because voting blue has never changed our conditions, ever. And so even when Obama was president, it didn't change it.
Nope.
And people keep pushing, we got to get the right people in, we got to continue to get people in, and not to take away from the grassroots work that's happening, that's gotten some people elected, right? Some who look like us, not to take away from that work. But imagine if we all stop putting like even 60% of that energy into reform work, to revolutionary work, how much further our people will be. So if we just shift it, even just a little, even if we just shifted 10%, how different this would look like in a month from now.
Yeah, like think about all like the labor and like money and like volunteer hours that go into like electoral politics. I'm just like, damn, imagine if we had that for community defense. These police would be scared. Like, I just like, oh my God. Like, it's so...
And I say that as somebody who years ago wanted to be a politician, right? Years ago, like even as an organizer, I knew like it had to be done at the community. Right. But I kept seeing these policies that were harming the community. And I was like, we got to get in and change them. But that allows us to survive. We're barely coming up from air. None of our conditions are being changed. And I am so glad I met like Hope Alvarado, comrade, who's in Red Nation, as a young person, mentoring me about why that was not the reason and the route to go. And I'm so glad I didn't do that, right? Because, like you said, the labor and time and energy to put into a system that harms us, like we can't change a capitalist. Like we can't change it. It's so embedded, we can't reform it. And so let's put that time and energy into revolutionary work, or like you were saying, like I want that whole 200 million in our work. Yes. I don't want any of it in police work. I want it into the community doing the critical work that's centered, like it's centering the most impacted.
Right.
That's what I want to see. And beyond that, because that's just one system. There's more systems.
Yeah. And also the truth about abolition, even as Angela Davis imagines it, is that it's not going to happen under capitalism. It's not going to happen under this system. We're not abolishing the police successfully without a revolution that destroys capitalism. We're not abolishing prisons successfully without a revolution that destroys capitalism. So, like, fundamentally, the idea that we must, put our faith into, like, an agent of capitalism, like a proud capitalist. Biden has called himself a proud capitalist. And somehow that's going to get us closer to abolition is on its face incorrect. And like I said, much respect to Angela Davis and the work that she's done, but the facts are the facts.
Yes, for sure.
The facts are the facts. So yeah. Also, it's noon, and gotta go to work. So what do we want to do? Let's talk about COVID, and then maybe we can wrap it up.
Okay, real quick, COVID updates. So continue to wear a mask. We're still in a pandemic. Wear a mask, washing hands, avoiding crowds. Also, fines are being out there. So make sure that you are wearing your mask. If anyone you know is traveling, when they get back into the state, they have to quarantine for 14 days. New Mexico cases are rising, and we know that people behind the walls, it's rising. So for example, in Otero County, there's over 856 cases. We also know right now they're continuing to transport people from prison to prison to prison in the state during a pandemic. Again, trash. Right? Why would you be doing that? Why would you be locking up people? They're also locking up people for like violations of probations, which are minute, and it can be anything to where you didn't report a change of address or report a change of job. And so all those things are still happening. The conditions in the prisons are worse. So if you test positive, they like leave you there, no medical attention. They're not caring for you, not checking on you to see how you're doing. They're just pushing you and isolating you. It's actually worse than a 24-hour lockdown is what people are saying who are behind the walls. And they're transporting people, and those people like from Farmington that got transferred to Los Lunas, 2 of those people tested positive. And so again, that's happening in the pandemic. We know in Georgia, there was an outbreak, or 260 staff were either tested positive or was around somebody who was exposed to coronavirus. And so again, we know going back to school is not safe because we are in a pandemic. The other thing is evictions. Anya Selma was talking about this earlier. Like we should be organizing around evictions. And so over 30 million people can be impacted. That means like not have a place to live, like in a pandemic, because this country is continuing to not put in practices and policies and procedures that will help them. So over 30 million people are facing evictions. They have a 30-day notice. What is that? It's
30 days from July 25th, so August 25th.
August 25th. So that's their grace period that they have, and after that, whoop, evicting people out on the street. The other thing I want to point out is Over 12 million people in this country still never received their stimulus check. Mm-hmm. And the stimulus checks that did go out, it just went to pay people's rent, right? And mortgages and things like that. So it didn't like go to help them. It went back into capitalism. The deaths in this country is continuing to rise. We have a 5% in rising death rate of coronavirus. And so there's over almost 5 million positive cases in this country, and it's rising, continuous to rising, and so many deaths. The last thing I will say about this is around the pandemic is like, think about the practices we're doing here versus like Cuba and Venezuela and other countries that are like Cuba went door-to-door testing, door-to-door checking on folks, bills are being paid for, they have free healthcare, but all their needs are being met, right, in the pandemic. And they have a 0.04% death rate in their country. And they've also gone to other 50 different countries providing medical treatment to boost the immune system. So there's not a cure, but the medicine that they have has been saving lives. Versus this country, like literally, there's no plan. The plan is for us to die. That's the plan as they continue to open in the middle of the pandemic where it was at its peak. And they're continuously pushing like open schools, open businesses. So their practices are very different compared to countries that are actually trying to save lives.
Weird. It's the difference between a social society and a capitalist society. Socialism is life first. Capitalism is money first. Socialism, you live. Capitalism, you die. And then they try to profit off of your death. But yeah, just to continue with the show, I'm going to skip some sections and go right to the New Mexico update and the local organizing updates because we got to wrap this up. It's supposed to be at a work meeting. Whoopsies. So yeah, we have in New Mexico, schools have been announced that the schools are going to be online until Labor Day. As Monica mentioned earlier, there's like no ways whatsoever that in-person school is going to be safe during this pandemic. Not in this country, and we've seen around the world in places where in-person school happened after lockdowns, like they saw a drastic rise in cases almost immediately within the children and the teachers. The same thing happened in Georgia, as Monica pointed out. And so the bottom line is that in-person school is not going to be safe during this pandemic, but also at the same time, like this constant rock and a hard place shit, there is a remarkable amount of students that are going to be left behind with online-only schools. Like, there's kids that do not have internet access at home. There's kids that do not have access to computers. And most of those kids are African, indigenous, and colonized children. There's also students who, even if they do have access to a computer, even if they do have access to internet, cannot learn that way. Like, struggle with all virtual education. So, like, once again, the failure of this system to prioritize life, the failure of this system in this country to prioritize the well-being of the people that live here is leading to a situation where parents, students, and teachers are being placed into having to make impossible choices that they're going to leave people screwed regardless of what we do. But the bottom line is that in-person school is too dangerous, and so all these alternatives, like people are scrambling to organize like something. Like some parents with resources and privilege are trying to organize like their own little schools, but then who's getting locked out of those schools? Who has access to people with the knowledge to homeschool? Exactly, Monica's like me. So like, it's just, yeah, capitalism creates nothing but impossible situations and then leaves people to die while dealing with those situations. And we need a complete revolution. We need the overturning and destruction of the system from top to bottom. We need to replace it with something better. And we have the example of Cuba. We have the example of Venezuela. We have the example of these successful revolutions to look to let us know that we don't have to settle for this bullshit. We do not have to deal with this. We can do so much better. We just need to build it together. We need to build the revolution together. So yeah, we just wanted to like uplift that schools cannot open physically safely, but the alternatives that exist are going to leave many, many, many people behind. And those people are going to be our people. Those people are going to be indigenous people. Those people are going to be colonized people. Other things happening in New Mexico, our comrade Clifton White with Millions for Prisoners, who was targeted and persecuted and then arrested by New Mexico police for the crime of organizing in his community, for the crime of organizing for African liberation. He has to date not committed any crime. They're not even saying he did anything. It is clearly a political prosecution, clearly political persecution for engaging in the work that he did in his community. And so we unfortunately learned yesterday that his parole has been revoked, that it will not be reinstated, and that they are currently looking at sentencing him. And so again, I want to repeat, this man committed no crime. The only crime he committed was the one he was originally on parole for, that he committed when he was like 17. No new crime has been committed this year or any year before that, except for the original reason why he was on parole. And so they are targeting this man, and they are using the hold the system has on him to take him out of the movement and to take him away from his family. And so we cannot accept that. We cannot allow that to happen to any single person in this movement. And so that's why we're continuing to uplift this story. We have to let them know that we are watching what y'all are doing. We see what you're doing, and we do not accept him. You are targeting this man, and you are targeting his partner, Cylinder Guerrero, with Millions for Prisoners. You are targeting African and Indigenous and Chicano organizers in this city because they are fighting to build justice for their people. Like, that's why you're doing that. That's why APD is always up their ass. Like, that's why. So, like, please stay tuned to the Millions for Prisoners New Mexico Facebook page to get the latest updates on Clifton White's case and how you can help the campaign to liberate that man. Also, check out the Building Power for Black New Mexico Facebook page for more details about the case as well. But once again, this is very, very clearly political persecution for engaging in movement work. Like, this man committed no crime. This man has done nothing wrong. They're targeting him because they can. Because they can. And it's extremely fucked up. Also, positive news in the city. Our comrades at the Red Nation, Pueblo Action Alliance, Yucca Action, Indigenous Women Rising, alongside organizations like us, like the APRP, had an extremely successful mobilization against the presence of federal federal agents in the Albuquerque as part of Operation Legend. That happened on Friday, July 31st, and it was remarkable. It was hundreds of people gathered together talking about death to the United States. I love it when people say death to the United States. That is a way to my heart. So they said death to the United States. They said smash capitalism. They said land back, give Indigenous people their land back. They had hundreds of people rallied around an anti-imperialist, an anti-colonial, a revolutionary socialist message. Like, it was so beautiful. I'm like tearing up. So yeah, like, that happened, and it was safe. It was safe, and it was militant. The raggedy ass civil guard, the militia group we have that turns up to many actions to terrorize people with weapons. They were there, but they like holed up in a motherfucking sub shop because it was raining. They couldn't get their guns wet. So like, and then like the police like had all their shit out. They had their riot gear. They had their fucking tank. Like, they had all their shit out when it started raining. When Mother Nature was on the side of the masses of the people, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't bring violence to the space because the rain washed their asses out. And so the march continued successfully, and hundreds of people in this city were mobilized around a revolutionary message led by Indigenous people.
I just want to say something that one of the comrades of the Red Nation said that we are the storm. And that was just so beautiful and powerful, like the movement, the revolution, that's us. We are the storm. And so just appreciative being out there in solidarity with Indigenous comrades in this action. So definitely is beautiful. Check out their Facebook pages. You can see so much more. Just completely beautiful and powerful. Look forward to doing more with them.
Do not sleep on Tiwa territory. Like, there is incredible organizing and extremely powerful anti-colonial organizations led by African and Indigenous people in the city. So don't sleep on the city. We're doing good shit. And then also tomorrow, August 7th, a coalition of groups is having an action. Actually, Monica, you explain it because I do not know all the details.
Yeah, it's at the UNM bookstore. So there's an action being held. So in this state, of course, right, what this state does is if you work in a school, work in a university, work in a college, your money is going into a retirement plan called the ERB. And that retirement plan invests in private prisons, right? So if you are working for any of those establishments, you should be emailing. We'll put it in the comments later, or you can send an email. You can go to the action. They're taking public comment only till tomorrow by 5 p.m. They're not going to have public comment during. The Santa Fe Dreamers Project has been working on this in coalition with different organizations. So our money in this state is invested into private prisons. Here in this state where we have the most private prisons and on the border, right, where people are coming to the border seeking refuge and they're being incarcerated, locked in cages, and profited off. So here in New Mexico, we have GEO Group and Core Civic. Nationwide, altogether, this is a $60 billion industry. And yes, New Mexico dollars. dollars. So I worked in a school system. I worked for APS before. Like, my dollars went into that retirement plan. That should not be happening. Nobody who works in none of our dollars should be invested into the prison industrial complex. Come out 4 to 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. at the UNM bookstore. You can also find more information on Millions for Prisoners page.
Sweet. And then on August 8th, Saturday, August 8th, there is a defund APS action. Defund police and APS action. And so the reason why that's happening is because there is, like, the Albuquerque public school system has its own fucking police force, and they are armed, and they are engaging with African, Indigenous, and Chicano youth and criminalizing them while they are trying to go to school. And so Fight for Our Lives and a coalition of community organizations that includes APRP New Mexico is having a march and rally to demand that those police be defunded, that they should not be in those schools. They should certainly not be armed in those schools. And that the resources, the millions and millions of dollars that go to that police force should instead be invested in the youth and in the schools themselves. And so if you're interested, please come out. Saturday, August 8th from 5 to 8 p.m. You can find all the details on the event page on our page or on the Fight for Our Lives Albuquerque Facebook page. Also, local organizing to support during COVID-19. So just very, very quickly, we've reiterated many, many times throughout the show, like, this is not the time to try to lone wolf this shit. Like, if you are not in an organization, consider yourself on the sidelines, homie. You are not in the movement. You are on the sidelines. We need you to get off those sidelines. We need you to get into an organization. We need you on the front lines or just helping in the back. But do that shit within the context of an organization that is accountable to your people and accountable to the movement. Get off the sidelines. Stop trying to act like Superman. Superman is not real, and superheroes are racist anyway. So stop that shit. Join an organization fighting for justice. If you're African, the APRP is constantly recruiting, and let me tell you, we do a lot of shit. Like, we have this show, we have our monthly film series, we have constant political education events, we have coalition work, working against imperialism, we have our community defense program where we're feeding families and elders every single week. We have a lot of work, and there's, like, not enough of us. Like, there's not enough of us. Like, we do so much, and it's so among so few hands. Imagine what we could accomplish with more people. So please, if you watch the show, if you're an African and you're in New Mexico or somewhere outside New Mexico and you're interested in joining the APRP, reach out to us. Message us on Facebook. Give us an email at aprpnewmexico@gmail.com. But reach out, because we can get you oriented, we can get you filled in on what our work is, and we can get you actively involved very quickly. So please do that. And then also, Albuquerque Mutual Aid has fed over 11,000 people in the city of Albuquerque here in occupied Tiwa territory. And they are doing so with no grant funding, with no nonprofit status, with nothing but community members coming together to collectivize and share resources and distribute those resources to their people. This is grassroots, bottom-up work that is feeding thousands of people in the city. And so if you're a person that is food insecure and needs support at this time, or if you want to donate, or if you want to volunteer to help because they need more hands, go to ffol.org/mutual aid, and you can find a form to request a care package and also a form to donate or volunteer. Also, our comrades at the Free Access to Movements FAM Childcare Collective host a weekly sing-along and story time Saturdays at 3 p.m. Avery, who our comrade Avery, who's on the screen right now, often joins FAM. I believe Avery is in the APRP, but I'll let Avery decide for himself. But anyway, but yeah.
Yes.
So FAM is a childcare collective that when we used to have in-person events before the pandemic, they would do childcare for free at our events every single time. Like, people would bring their kids, their babies, because children are part of the revolution. We're doing this work so they can carry it through. And so FAM creates accessibility so that these children and full families can be in movement spaces. So shout out to FAM, and also shout out to FAM for continuing that work. And then also our comrades at the John Brown Breakfast Club are continuing to do their weekly solidarity feed every Saturday morning around 9 or 10 a.m. at the corner of First and Silver. They give away really, really good breakfast burritos. Like, they're so good. I might just be really hungry, but they're very good. And so if you are a person who's food insecure, or you want to help, or you just want to check out like a really cool project, check it out Saturday mornings at the corner of First and Silver at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. As terms of our work here with the APRP, our next event is going to be the Pan-African Film Series this Saturday the 8th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So every single month on the second Saturday of the month, we host a film screening. We show revolutionary African movies that are talking about imperialism, that are talking about colonialism, that are talking about revolution. And so the film that we're going to be showing this month is one of my personal favorite movies ever. It's a documentary about the life of Winnie Mandela called Winnie. If you heard the name Winnie Mandela before, it's likely you've only heard about her talked about in relation to her husband, Nelson Mandela. But what you need to know about Winnie Mandela is Winnie Mandela was a motherfucking soldier. She was a revolutionary. She was a leader in her own right. And long after Nelson Mandela began to make compromises that he felt he needed to with the system, Winnie Mandela was representing the people, and Winnie Mandela was militant as fuck. She gets no credit. She was very often demonized in the Western press because she was so uncompromising about the liberation of our people. And what this documentary does, what this movie does, is tell her truth, is use her words and the words of people that loved her to talk about who she actually was and what she actually believed. This is something that revolutionary African women rarely get. We are very often misunderstood. We are very often erased. And so we are very intentionally elevating Mama Winnie Mandela with this screening on Saturday. And we're doing it to commemorate Pan-African Women's Day, which is a celebration of revolutionary African women all around the world. So if you are interested in learning about the truth about Winnie Mandela, if you want to hear from revolutionary African women in the community in Ayetepepe, New Mexico, if you want to hear some really radical poetry from the youth, then come to our film screening Saturday at 2 p.m. We're hosting it virtually. So the same way that you're watching this show right now, you can tune into the film series 2 p.m. Mountain Time. And lastly, our Carmat Ajamu hosts a show as well every single Sunday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. He and his daughter Shakora cover a different topic in depth every single Sunday for an hour. And so I'm not sure what the topic is going to be this Sunday, but I do know it's going to be hot fire, and it's going to be explained in a way that is going to be both entertaining and also extremely accessible. So if you want to tune into that, you can watch it on Ajamu's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/ajamu.umi at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. And if you can't tune in live, you can find all the episodes of his show on APRP International YouTube channel. So we are over time. I definitely missed that meeting. It's all good. It's all good. This is more important. So yeah, once again, we are the All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico chapter. My name is Onya Sanwu. This was Monica Avery, also comrades in the New Mexico chapter. This is Weekly Pan-African News Live, a weekly show we do every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, where we give you news, analysis, and political education from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective. We do this because we know no one else is going to do it. We know they're never going to let us onto their platform, so we're going to make our own. And once again, we are revolutionary Pan-Africanists. We believe when Africa is free, Africans everywhere will be free. And we hope you tune in again next week. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Anything to say, Monica?
No, thank you. Stay ready for the revolution, y'all.
Hell yeah.